Oh, where are you? Are you in Vancouver?
Yeah, just outside Vancouver, a neighboring town.
How is it?
Pouring rain, very quiet.
Yeah. And are you in lockdown or anything at the moment? Or
No, it's uh, not so severe as that. Restaurants are mostly open with limited seating and that kind of thing, but it's been fairly low key. Not that we're doing anything that's actually working, it's just
yeah,
on it goes, you know.
yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Tell me about it. I think we're sort of on the road to coming out of it, which means I can start doing kind of cinema stuff actually in real life. Um, but yeah, it's been a strange old year. Not a wholly bad year,
Right.
if I'm honest. How about you? Have
Yeah,
you
no.
work?
Um, it's been strange. I mean, usually I'm traveling quite a bit, so that's all gone. But I'm making my books. I'm tend to be working on one book project or another at any given time, and I mean, mercifully, the galleries that represent me continue to sell work during this period, so that's been super helpful, of course.
Have they actually sold more during this period of time, or?
I wouldn't say more, but it hasn't interrupted things, which is quite curious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that auction houses have sold phenomenal amounts more, and
Uh,
the price of things has gone up. It's
yeah.
interesting. I think the people that have got money are prepared to buy stuff.
Yeah.
So
I think that's true. I mean, folks with discretionary money to spend because they can't travel, it's maybe going into other things.
yeah, exactly. I'm selling Keith Richards' jacket that I own.
Are
That I
you?
bought at auction 20 years ago. So I bought a three-wheeler Vespa car as a truck thing, which I'm going to use to transport my cinema equipment and pop up anywhere. Because I love the idea
Fantastic.
of popping up in like desolate places and showing an appropriate film.
How great. Huh.
So
Okay.
yeah, so Keith Richards, I've christened the van Keith Richards. So so yeah.
So
Did you get the list
I,
of questions?
I
Okay.
did, yeah. I had a quick look through them. I mean, yeah, thanks for sending them. I think I can respond to them without too much problem. I mean, yeah, they're things I can talk about, I think, without any too much brow knitting. So that's good.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, just so tell me a little bit about what you're doing, because this is quite extraordinary. You have these cinema evenings in these outdoor space projections
Yeah.
under overpasses. It looks fantastic.
So basically, what happened is I normally in my day-to-day job for 20 years I've had a company, and I've done marketing for theatre, plays, musicals, everything, and also art galleries. And then obviously a year ago, 4 days ago, or whenever it was, all of that ended. So I've always had a cinema club. So I started it by I just got a bunch of friends and did it in a pub in Soho where the Rolling Stones used to perform. And I showed a film, this really obscure film called The Small World of Sammy Lee, which is, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's
I
Anthony
haven't.
Newley, and part of it takes part in this pub.
Huh.
So I started by doing that, and then I showed Nosferatu in a medieval tower. And during lockdown, I realised that we were allowed to join in groups of 6 together outside. So I went and found these venues that we could show. Basically, I bought a 20-foot inflatable screen and started just showing films. And then I know I've worked with people from Hammer Horror before, so they allowed me to have a few films.
Hmm.
And I basically, I got in touch with Russ Mayer's people this week for our next one, and it's run by this woman Janice in LA. You ring her mobile, It's like, I can't think of another film company where they do this. I really want to show, I emailed her and I texted her, said, I want to show Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. And I watched it again and realized it's quite feminist, actually. It's got this whole hilarious line of this horrible, nasty old man who kind of says, you know, that if you give women the vote and you allow them to wear cigarettes and pants, you end up with a president who's a Democrat. I was just like, this is hilarious. So yeah, so like what I've been doing is I kind of curate images as well. So, you know, we'd like I've kind of done, like I did Badlands, and I've been doing it at home where kind of, you just link to YouTube or Amazon or whoever it is. And then I do, like, I get people order like burger kits and things, and they get them delivered all over the UK, weirdly. I had someone in El Paso when we did Harold and Maude, because she loves Harold and Maude. She saw it on an email that I was promoting on. And then we all watch the film, and then we do a Zoom afterwards where we all have a chat.
How nice. That sounds so much fun. That's so great.
So then what I'm doing so basically I know like the editor of GQ in this country, and so he's kind of been really supportive. There's an email that goes out called Pop Bitch. So I'm going to basically what I'm doing is I'm just keeping promoting the images of things that people, sorry, that's what I was saying. So when I did Badlands, I found this, there's these guys that take photographs of abandoned buildings in the Midwest. But basically what they realized when they were doing this was they kept finding bits of denim. And obviously these pieces of denim, you know, are 150 years old. And people like Levi's would buy them from them for $20,000, $30,000 to copy them. And this kind of became a business for them, an accidental business. And it's, and so I kind of like, I keep promoting them. I might do a Kickstarter book with them because that's not really their main business. So yeah, and then I have like a DJ, and I have a guy in, there's a musician and a curator who lives in Bristol who I work with, and he brought a Yoko Ono exhibition to Bristol. And so I just kind of work with these different people, and then I'm just going to keep promoting those people going forward. And then you very kindly said you would get involved, so thank you.
I'm so intrigued. It all sounds great. I mean, it just touches on so many things I'm interested in, and were, you know, kind of formative films and times for me, you know, when you're talking about Harold, Maude and Badlands. I mean, those were, you know, really powerful things to see when you're young. So
it's funny. It's funny because I like looking at your photos. There is that kind of Raging Bulls kind of like, you know, the book about like kind of that whole Scorsese kind of Coppola time, and I think, I don't know why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of the color, because of the film, because of what you're shooting?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I actually haven't thought about it, and probably couldn't give you a clear answer because it's just too, I don't know, too deep or too part of things now that I don't even know how to separate it all. But, you know, when I was a teenager and I started making pictures, it was around that time of Hollywood when people like Altman and early Scorsese were making films that had these either flat endings or bad endings. You know, it was a time of this really key filmmaking period, and they hardly do that anymore, you know, where a film ends on a kind of a flat note with things being not resolved, you know. Thunderbolt.
Someone pointed out to me that I did 2 films in a row where one of the main protagonists died, you know, and it just doesn't happen anymore, does it?
Yeah, right. You know, and so there's the look of the time, you know, they were contemporary films at the time, and so they didn't register as retro 70s vintage anything, you know, they were films of that moment. And you know, the pictures I was making at that time are similar in that that's how things looked then. And, you know, I mean, 20 years, 30 years later, you get this kind of retro vintage bump, but that wasn't part of things back then. It's just the way things looked. And I guess I was attracted to things that were maybe a little out of time at that time. So that would mean, you know, things from the 50s, I guess, were a feature. And, you know, I mean, certain there wasn't the real estate impetus to redevelop and change things in cities in the spotlight. You know, a place like Vancouver now is in the spotlight, and an empty lot or a building that's not being used as a target for redevelopment. And, you know, that wasn't Vancouver back then. Vancouver hadn't been discovered by global investment capital, you know, it was just a
Yeah.
town into the tracks. And so things moved in a different way here and in other places.
But
And
you were quite young when you started, weren't you, doing that in Vancouver in the docks and things?
yeah, I was a teenager, yeah. So
But did you, am I right in having read that you went and stayed there?
I used to stay in cheap hotels downtown as a teenager, yeah. And in high school, I'd spend weekends in a cheap hotel and photograph and that kind of thing. So,
Do you think because you were staying in those places, it kind of gave you an eye to it, or was it a logistical thing, or did it open your
yeah,
eyes?
a mixture of both. I mean, I didn't, you know, I lived with my parents in the suburbs, kind of, you know. I mean, and so I was you know, a dilettante explorer of that part of the city I knew nothing about, you know. So,
Yeah. And were you accepted? You know, 'cause as a 17-year-old kid with a camera, you must have kind of stood out a bit, did you? Or
I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't go, I don't need or aspire to acceptance. I just need like to be tolerated, you know,
yeah,
and you know, I never, I mean, I knew I wasn't of that and didn't belong there. I mean, that was clear, and it was an adventure to me. And so, I mean, maybe, yeah, in some situations, I think the key is that you're not, obviously not threatening, you know,
yeah,
you're unlikely to call the police on the people using drugs you're hanging out with. And for older folks, you're just something of a novelty, you
yeah.
know. Yeah,
It's
I think the
funny
main
though,
point
because
is
it's
there's just
because
no threat.
we're watching After Hours, the Scorsese film, and Griffin Dunn. It's like, I mean, it's like I was thinking about it and thinking about I mean, he's a yuppie, and it's kind of like, and it is about the gentrification of Soho. You know, it's pre-gentrification of Soho in New York, and I kind of figured that your photos are kind of perfect for that. But he is out of place, and he is threatened. You know,
Right. Yeah,
um,
he's on his he's on his roller coaster ride. I mean, I was protected in the sense that I had something to do, you know, like I was
yeah,
making pictures. So that I didn't need anything else than that, you know, that was my license. And that's kind of what, you know, making pictures is even now, right?
yeah.
Um, so
It kind of gives you a purpose, which means that you kind of become anonymous.
yeah, that's right. You know, you're in service of this other thing you're doing, you know. So you're just there to do that.
But when you went, so when you was it Tokyo that you went to and you arrived and you walked around and just kept shooting for the whole night?
Yeah,
And you know that kind of, it's like there's that moment between kind of like 3:30 and 5 in the morning where the world is a different place. And
absolutely.
and I mean it's quite attractive, that, because it's kind of it's weird because in London in lockdown is kind of, it's been a bit like that a lot of the
Right.
time. But it's like it becomes still and life goes kind of slower. And
Yeah.
did you feel that in Tokyo? What did you like when you went to Tokyo and and it is like alien and amazing? What did you
Yeah.
feel?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I mean, just to make one point is that in those days, you know, modern Japan hadn't arrived yet, you know, in the West sensibility, you know, it was all pre-Blade Runner. So there was no kind of information about Tokyo as a modern kind of super hip, interesting city, you know. That happened soon after, but you kind of didn't figure that out until you kind of went there, and then you realized it's, oh, you know, this whole other thing going on.
What year was
And
it
so
that you
I
arrived,
loved
Greg?
it. Sorry,
What year was it that you arrived,
that
Greg?
was 76.
26, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so I walked around that first night just, you know, dazzled by this city. And And you're right, things go quiet in the middle of the night, and that's maybe demarcated in Tokyo by when the trains stop running and when they start again.
Yeah.
And they have these like all night cafes, which are basically a booth with an overpriced cup of coffee, and they're meant for people to crash for 3 or 4 hours waiting for the train,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was sort of interesting to discover from the get-go, walking around that first night, looking to cool your heels somewhere. And so you pay a few dollars for this cup of coffee, and you and other people kind of are crashed out in these booths,
Yeah.
and no one
It's
bothers
like the
you.
diner in After Hours that Griffin Dunn goes back to, and the
Ah,
guy says, doesn't charge him and says, different rules apply
yeah, right.
after hours. It's kind of
Yeah,
like, and it
no,
is. I mean, and it's like because a lot of your photos as well have kind of in the East have also included kind of American servicemen and Navy people, and and it just always strikes me there's a lot of the alien about what you do, both you and your subjects as well.
fair enough. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but then it's. I mean, I wondered, do you ever take photos to where you're in them?
I don't
No,
know.
because I was thinking,
Well, having said that, I mean, okay, yeah, I have done it.
okay,
I have done it. No, you're right. And um, I just kind of I rarely show them, or post them, but I have done it. In fact, I did one just before the world um, stopped moving in an airport hotel in Tokyo, and I'm my subject. I wanted to see a hotel room with jets outside the
yeah,
window, and so yeah, I did that with me reading, my face hidden, by a book.
yeah, a sort of Stephen Shaw-esque kind of diary photo.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah,
that's exactly right. So yeah, I take that back. I have done it. Not a lot, but I have done it. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, is it because I mean you've gone like from full film, haven't you? You've gone from film to an SLRs, and now do you use digital? Did I read? Is that right, or
I'm
do you do a mix?
still I'm still mostly shooting film. I do some digital as well, depending on the situation, but I'm still mostly doing film, and it gets scanned and digitized and then
Yeah.
used. So yeah.
And do you think that photography has changed and that opportunity for people to take photos, especially at night, actually, in places they maybe wouldn't have taken photos before because of cameras on phones and things like that?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's easy to make a picture with your phone under any lighting conditions, and that's just extraordinary. I mean, it used to be a real hurdle, making a picture at night. There was a fair bit of craft involved, to get it to look good. And it's so simple now to do it. It's not even hardly even need to think about it.
Yeah. But do you think that the kind of the world that you were photographing is disappearing with globalization, with kind of gentrification, or do you just have to work harder to find it?
Well, I mean, there's always stuff that's hidden, and
Yeah.
um, either hidden in plain sight, or you need an entry, uh, you know, someone to lift the velvet rope, or to show you the way in, or to get permission. I mean, there's always hidden stuff, and yeah, I don't think that's going to change. I mean, night is no longer the unexplored territory that it used to be. That I think that's one thing that's changed just in picture making and what just kind of circulates on Instagram and elsewhere, and just in movie making and in commercials. I mean, we see night in a way that it just wasn't possible until quite recently.
And do you think it's to do with the fact that everything has properly gone 24/7? Because in the period you're talking about, it would have been Tokyo and New York that were only 24/7, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. I mean, I think when you go out doing whatever you do, whether it's, photographing or writing or whatever work you do, you kind of make the world your own by doing it, and it's everybody's personal journey. And I think all that is still out there. It's just, uh, the entryway is maybe more narrow than it used to be and less obvious, but I think all that stuff is still out there. It's just things that used to be hidden no longer are.
Yeah. What do you mean the entryway's more hidden?
I mean, you
Or
might have to find something that hasn't been done,
yeah,
that's those things are more hidden and more narrow to find their way into. But I think that's always been the case, I mean, in a way, when you're starting out, everything already feels done, and done to death. And somehow everybody keeps making new amazing work, and we still see new great things from artists and filmmakers and photographers and writers. So I don't think there's any impediments really.
yeah. Do you still have the same passion, do you think, that you had all those years ago?
Um, yeah, I mean, I still want to, I still get a kick out of traveling, for example. That's completely undiminished, and that makes me feel like things are fresh and new.
Yeah,
That's completely undiminished, and um, for sure, there's a lot more people working, and there's people who kind of do what I do, and I thought I was the only one doing it, and now I see there's a lot of people doing the things I do, which is just kind of encouragement to go and find something different.
yeah. I mean, do you think that I was because I came across you on Instagram a while ago, and it's like, do you think that that's helped to open up as well to like new audiences for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it really has, and maybe a bit of a late adopter to social media and Instagram, but maybe like a lot of people, I just played with it, and then it got to be a bit of a habit, and then it became kind of part of the work that I
Yeah,
do now in terms of letting people know about what I do. So yeah, it's become more of a real thing than I anticipated and planned for. I mean, the step for me in using, let's say, Instagram was, instead of posting phone pictures, I started posting my real work, let's call it,
right.
and
Yeah,
then continue doing that, and you know, uh, continue to have people, find out about what I do, and it's been, very helpful for introducing people to the books I make, and to some extent to the galleries that represent me. So it's been really helpful.
and did you say to me on a message that the like the prints that you had, like the human vapor and things? So are some of your prints kept in the East, and some of them are at home with you in Vancouver?
But what would happen, I'm using slide film,
Yeah,
and so that would be in plastic sheets or in small Kodak boxes, and that would get stored wherever I'm living and move when I moved. And so in a place like Hong Kong, which is really humid and hot, and I didn't have 24-hour climate control, so the slides some of them would start to be affected by the temperature and humidity, and they'd start to get problems with fungus,
yeah,
discoloration, fading. And then also one day, my apartment flooded during a typhoon, and I'd had things piled on the floor, and I I was away on a trip for a few days, so I came back to a flooded apartment and water logged film and
Yeah.
negatives and such. So a lot of this stuff is unusable for a traditional magazine, but
Right.
um, I ended up using some of it and making prints of these distressed pictures.
So is that
And
like the scooter picture that you sent me?
that's right. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
got water damage, big discoloration and
But there's something
whatnot.
amazing about that. How do you feel about that? Does it pain you, or do you think it's part of the art, or?
In the beginning, it pained me, but then as I kept looking at it, I thought it's okay. You know, it it's it was definitely part of Hong Kong life, and the image is there, you know, but something's happened to it. So
It's part
it
of its
was interesting.
story in a way.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, you
because
know,
it's like the kind of photo it's taken on its own story by living somewhere and kind of being damaged by
yeah,
this thing.
and
Yeah.
that's exactly right, you know, and I mean, a lot of things as I've moved around have been lost. And for example, you know, you shoot, let's say, for example, black and white negative film, and then you make a contact sheet as your positive reference
Yeah.
to do your edit or your selecting for making enlargements. And at some point, the negatives were lost, and and only the contact sheet remains. So in a way, I thought those pictures as well are no longer anything I can do anything with, but you know, the image is still there. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, much smaller. And if you enlarge it, you actually get the texture of the paper. And, you know, so it's very different from a traditional photograph for use in a magazine or a traditional print, but
Have you
you
got them
still,
where you've marked the contact sheets as well?
for example, yeah, you
Yeah.
know, so again, it just becomes another level of things to
Yeah.
play. And I don't think I'm the first person to kind of use the contact sheet as something kind of primary as a reference, but you know, I had my own things to do with it in terms of you know, wanting to make a print from something where there's no longer a negative. So it's soft and you see the texture of the paper and whatnot.
Yeah.
It becomes something else.
Yeah, I love that. Um, so, like you said to me that on the message that you kind of like wished you could go back and watch Badlands and and Harold and Maude again for the first time. It's kind of I was kind of interested to know because your film tastes are clearly quite attuned with Rebel Reel Cine Clubs, but I don't know what kind of like what are the films that kind of like for you kind of stand out in kind of the history of.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think so much of it has to do with, you know, being young and certain films having a big impact. Um, I mean, and any number of 70s films were really powerful to me. Um, Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Badlands, which you've mentioned, and Harold and Maude. The Long Goodbye by
Yeah,
Robert Altman. I really like that one for his um, kind of take on Los Angeles of the day,
yeah,
and using, you know, kind of color, sunshine, and noir and 70s Hollywood all mixed together was, I thought, a really particular feel
yeah.
and perspective.
Did you watch Once Upon a
Um,
Time in America, in Hollywood? Sorry, the Tarantino film.
I did enjoy that. I mean, you know, what's not to like about a recreation of that period?
Exactly. But it's weird because the light's not quite right, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
um, uh, I didn't pick up on that. How do you mean?
Well, I just kind of feel like I don't know whether it's because of what it's filmed on. It's like when you watch The Hateful Eight, he's kind of filmed it in CinemaScope, and you can kind of tell. But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think what you're saying about kind of Altman's Long Goodbye, and things like Polanski's Chinatown. There's a kind of like there's a certain kind of film stock and light that just is different, and it is a very 70s feel, and it is like the feel of like your photographs, I think, and the colors as well, that are kind of, it's interesting when you were talking about the all night cafe. I was thinking like so many of your photos have those kind of really rich greens and reds and the neon with it as well. And there's something about, I don't know whether you can ever recreate something from a period of time, like properly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, one reason I still use film is because it gives me that kind of look that I want, and I think it can be recreated digitally, but it would just for me mean more work, you
Yeah.
know, to do that. And I mean, I think now they have particular film stock plugins for cameras to recreate particular film stock. So I mean, it's all gotten apparently really easy if you know how to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and I do see that, you know, in some people's posting on Instagram, which has quite a distinctly a film look. And quite often it's a bit overdone. I mean, the signature look for transparency film, which I shoot on, tends to be saturated colors and unnatural color shifts because the film is balanced for daylight. And so when you
Right.
use fluorescent light, it tends to go green, and incandescent light goes quite yellow. And with digital, you can crank all that up, which people tend to do or overdo sometimes, I think. But, you know, in the 70s when film was the only option, you know, different cinematographers had brought different levels of craft to bear, and some were, you know, exemplary, and others were more workaday. And so, you know, I mean, the famous cinematographers really had their particular styles and looks and were
Yeah.
absolute masters of the craft.
Yeah. Okay. I think honestly that's all great, and thank you. And thank you for allowing us to show your pictures and for being interviewed and everything. You've obviously you've got books coming. You've got quite a lot of books out already, haven't you? Is it 8 books? I can't remember how many it is.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what you count as a book sometimes, but yeah, in between 8 and 10. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I've got a couple collaborations and then a bunch of solo things. So
And
yeah,
so you're working on a book at the moment. Is that
I
right?
am. Yeah.
Yeah. And when will you start travel? Do you know when you'll start traveling again? Or
Boy, who knows? I mean,
yeah,
I'm hoping by, you know, towards the end of this year. I mean, we'll see whether there's some kind of vaccination passport that airlines and countries agree on to allow travel to resume. But I mean, who knows?
yeah. Well, look, thank you so much for doing this. I really, really appreciate it, and I think it's the perfect fit for the Scorsese's After Hours. So yeah, that's great.
Great choice of film.
Thank you.
I look forward to rewatching it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.